Reflecting the world in polished chrome, our stories show you the sharp edges and the smooth surfaces of reality. Dive into these high-contrast reflections of the human experience and find yourself within the frame. Click subscribe now and see the world through our unique cinematic lens.
Sign it, Maya. It's just paperwork. Your family, not a stranger. My brother said that while sitting in my home office, in my chair, behind my desk, the one I bought with my first bonus check 3 years ago, he had his feet up. He was holding a pen that wasn't his, pointing it at a document I hadn't read yet. I was standing in my own doorway holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, trying to understand how someone who shares my blood could look at me like I was the inconvenience in the room. I didn't sign it that night, but I almost did. And that almost is the reason I'm telling you this story. Before I get into how I watched my brother's lawyer stand up in the middle of a deposition and ask to be removed from the case, tell me in the comments, what is the most entitled thing a family member has ever tried to make you sign? I read every single one. I need to go back 2 years, because this story doesn't start with the power of attorney document. It starts with a phone call at 6:47 inches the morning from my mother, who only calls that early when someone has died or needs money. That morning, it was the second one. My brother Derek had a problem. Derek always had a problem. That was in a way his entire identity, a man permanently surrounded by problems that were never his fault, and always someone else's responsibility to fix. This time, his restaurant was failing. Not struggling, failing. 3 months behind on rent, vendors threatening to sue, 2 health code violations pending, and a staff that had stopped showing up because the last 2 payroll checks had bounced. My mother explained all of this in the tone she reserved for reporting natural disasters, like Derek was the victim of weather, not of his own decisions. He needs a bridge loan, she said, just to get through the next quarter. He's so close to turning it around. You know how talented he is. I knew exactly how talented he was. I had watched my brother open that restaurant with $180,000, $60,000, of which was a loan from our parents that had been quietly converted to a gift the moment it became clear he wasn't paying it back. I had watched him spend $12,000 on a custom neon sign before he had a working POS system. I had watched him hire his girlfriend as the creative director at $75,000 a year for a 40-seat bistro that didn't have a functional website. I am a software engineer at a firm in Austin. I have been employed, consistently, since I was 22 years old. I have never once asked my parents for money. I have a 401k, a taxable brokerage account, a 6-month emergency fund, and a 820 credit score. In my family, none of that is impressive. In my family, I am the boring one, the stable one, the one who will be fine no matter what, so she doesn't need as much attention. I wired Derek $30,000 that afternoon, because my mother was crying, because he was my brother, because I told myself it was a loan and I actually believed it. 8 months later, I flew home for Christmas. The restaurant had closed, permanently. Derek and his girlfriend, now fiancée, had moved into a new apartment on the east side, the kind with a rooftop terrace and a waiting list. My mother pulled me aside in the kitchen and told me, quietly, that they'd used the leftover funds to cover the security deposit and first 3 months. The way she said leftover funds, with that careful pause before the word leftover, told me everything. There were no leftover funds. There was my $30,000. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched my brother open a bottle of champagne in the living room to toast his engagement. His fiancée, Natalie, held out her hand to show my mother the ring. My mother gasped in the way she only gasped for things that cost real money. I drove back to Austin on December 26th and did not cry until I hit the state line. Not because of the money. Because of the way my brother had looked at me during that toast, grateful, warm, completely unbothered, like a man who had never considered for 1 second that something was owed. That was the moment I understood the structure of my family. I wasn't a sister. I was a liquidity event. So when Derek called me 14 months later, voice careful and reasonable, and asked if I would grant him power of attorney over my financial accounts while I was traveling internationally for a work assignment, I should have said no. I should have said it immediately, without explanation, without apology. Instead, I said, I'll think about it, because I was raised to soften everything, and I had not yet learned that softness in the wrong direction is just slow bleeding. He was patient about it. That should have been my first warning. Derek was never patient. He explained it calmly. I would be in Singapore for 6 weeks for a systems implementation project. He lived 10 minutes from my bank. If something came up, a billing issue, a renewal, a tax document that needed a signature, it would be faster if he could handle it locally. He framed it as doing me a favor. He said Natalie had done the same thing for her sister when she was deployed overseas. He sent me a template. He said it was standard. I said I needed to read it first. He said, of course, take your time, and then called my mother, who called me that same evening to mention, gently, how much stress Derek was under with the wedding planning, and how nice it would be if for once things could just be easy for him. I signed a limited power of attorney. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. The document I signed was supposed to authorize Derek to act on my behalf for specific administrative matters, only mail handling, utility accounts, one specific insurance renewal that had a deadline during my travel window. That was it. I had a lawyer look at the draft. She said it looked clean. I initialed the limitations section myself. I was in Singapore for 41 days. On day 38, I got a notification from my brokerage. Account transfer initiated, $287,500. I stared at my phone for a long time. The timestamp was 9:14 inches the morning, Central Time. The transfer destination was an account I didn't recognize. The authorization on file showed my power of attorney on record. I called my broker from a hotel bathroom at 11 p.m. Singapore time with my hand pressed against the wall because my legs had stopped working correctly. The representative told me the transfer had been authorized via the POA on file, that the receiving account was a joint account opened 6 days earlier in the names of Derek Allen Foster and Natalie Grace Wren. She told me that reversals on authorized transfers were not standard procedure and that I would need to contact legal counsel. I hung up. I sat down on the bathroom floor. The tile was cold, and the room smelled like the hotel's complimentary soap, and I remember thinking, with strange clarity, that $287,500 was exactly the amount I had been saving for 4 years to buy a house. I had mentally spent that money 100 times the yard, the street, the way afternoon light would come through the kitchen window, and now it was in a joint account with my brother's fiancée's name on it. I did not call Derek. I want you to understand that. Every instinct I had said call him, get him on the phone, find out what happened, give him a chance to explain. And I sat with that instinct for exactly as long as it took me to remember the restaurant, the SUV, the champagne, the ring. I called my attorney instead. Her name is Claire, and she is the kind of lawyer who speaks in complete sentences and never sounds alarmed, even when she is telling you very alarming things. She told me 3 things that first night. 1. The transfer had almost certainly exceeded the scope of the limited POA, which meant it was potentially unauthorized regardless of what the document said. 2. The fact that the receiving account was brand new, and in both Derek and Natalie's names, suggested this was not an accident or a misunderstanding. 3. I needed to be very careful about what I said to Derek before she had completed her review, because if he knew I was aware, money had a way of moving again. I booked an earlier flight home. I told my office there was a family emergency, which was true. I told Derek nothing. I landed in Austin on a Tuesday morning, went directly to Claire's office without going home, and spent 4 hours going through every document, every account statement, and every piece of communication I had saved because I have always saved everything. Emails, texts, voicemails, the original POA with my handwritten initials on the limitations page. Claire looked at the limitations page for a long time. Then she looked at the copy of the POA that the brokerage had on file. They were different. The version on file with my brokerage did not have a limitations section. It was a general POA. Broad, unrestricted, exactly the kind of document that would authorize a $287,500 transfer without raising a flag. The version I had signed, the one with my initials on the limitations page, was not the version Derek had submitted to my brokerage. Someone had removed the limitations section. Someone had resubmitted a different document. Claire said the word forgery quietly and with no drama, the way you say a word when it is simply the accurate word. She said we needed to verify which version had been submitted where, get statements from the brokerage on their authentication process. And this part, she said, slowly we needed to think carefully about what we wanted the outcome to be, before we did anything visible. Because here is the thing about confronting someone who has forged documents and stolen money from you. If you confront them directly, they know you know. And if they know you know, the money moves. It goes from the joint account to another account, or gets spent on something irreversible. Or suddenly there is a story about how it was repayment for something, how you agreed to it, how there was a conversation you are misremembering. Money is liquid. Evidence is not. Claire told me to go home, act normal, and let her work. I went home. I looked at my apartment, the furniture I had bought myself, the print above the couch I had saved for, the kitchen where I had taught myself to cook real food on weeknights after 10-hour workdays, and I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat at my own table, and I breathed, and I thought about what I knew about my brother. Derek believed he was smarter than any room he was in. He believed rules applied to other people. He believed that money I earned was, in some essential way, a family resource that I had simply been assigned to hold. He had believed this for as long as I could remember, and our family had never once corrected him. Every time he failed, someone absorbed the damage for him. Every time the bill came, someone else paid it. He had learned, over 34 years of consistent reinforcement, that there were no real consequences for taking from me. I was going to teach him what a real consequence looked like. I called him on a Thursday evening, 4 days after landing back in Austin. I used my regular number. I made my voice easy and warm, the voice I had practiced my whole life to manage his moods. "Hey," I said. "I just wanted to call and catch up. Singapore was a lot. I'm exhausted." He was relaxed. That confirmed he didn't know I'd come home early. He asked how the trip was. He told me the wedding venue was booked. He mentioned, with the careful casualness of someone who has rehearsed it, that he and Natalie had made a small investment recently, just getting their financial house in order before the wedding. Very routine. "That's great," I said. "Very smart to be thinking ahead." He agreed that yes, it was very smart. I let him talk for 20 minutes. I laughed at the right moments. At the end of the call, I told him I had something I needed his help with, that being overseas had made me realize I should probably restructure my accounts, consolidate things, and I wanted his advice. I told him he had always been better with the big picture financial stuff than I was. He loved that. I could hear it in his voice, the way he settled into the compliment like it fit him perfectly. He said absolutely, whatever I needed, just say the word. I said I'd put together some paperwork, and would he and Natalie be available to meet next week at my attorney's office? I told him Claire needed to be there for the notarization. Very routine, just how she preferred to handle restructuring documents. He said sure, no problem, and did not ask a single follow-up question, because he was not worried. Because in 34 years, I had never once done anything that required him to be worried about me. The conference room in Claire's office was not intimidating. That was intentional. It was a normal room with a round table and a whiteboard and a small window that looked out onto a parking structure. No chrome, no skyline view, no theater. Just a place where paperwork happened. Claire had told me that was important. We did not want them to feel like they were walking into a trap. We wanted them to feel like they were walking into exactly what I had described. Routine restructuring. A favor for Maya. They arrived together. Derek in a blazer. Natalie in a blazer. Both of them with the slightly overdressed energy of people who have been told this was a professional setting and made an effort. Natalie had a tote bag with the name of a wellness brand on it. Derek shook Claire's hand and made a small joke about lawyers that Claire did not laugh at. They sat down. I smiled at them from across the table. I offered coffee. Derek said sure. Claire opened her folder. She thanked them for coming in. She said she needed to establish a few preliminary facts before the restructuring documents could be processed, and that a notary would be joining us shortly to certify the statements. She said this was standard for her firm when changes involve transferred assets. Derek nodded the way people nod when they are not listening, just waiting for the part where they sign something. Claire slid a single sheet across the table. "This is an attestation form," she said. "It asks you to confirm your understanding of the power of attorney document you submitted to Maya's brokerage on her behalf, including the scope of authorization, and the basis for the transfer executed on April 9th. Derek looked at the sheet. His expression was still easy. He picked up the pen. "Before you sign," Claire said, her voice completely level, "I do need to advise you that this statement will be cross-referenced against the original POA document Maya executed prior to her travel, including the limitations addendum she initialed. I also want to advise you that making a false statement on a notarized attestation is perjury, and that any discrepancy between your attestation and the documentation on file may result in a referral to the appropriate authorities." Natalie's hand, which had been resting flat on the table, curled slightly. "It's a standard advisement," Claire said, not looking at either of them. "I give it to everyone. Please take a moment to review the form before you sign." Derek looked at the form. Then he looked at me. I looked back at him. I kept my face neutral. I had practiced this in my bathroom mirror for 2 nights. No anger. No satisfaction. Just steady, even, patient, the face of a woman who already knows everything and is simply waiting for the record to confirm it. He set the pen down. He picked it back up. He looked at Claire. "What limitations addendum?" he said. Claire opened a second folder. Inside was a color copy of the POA. I had signed, my initials visible on every page, including the limitations addendum. A single page clearly numbered as page 4 of 4, with my handwriting in the margin where I had written, "Must review any action exceeding $10,000 and initialed below it." She placed it on the table in front of him. Then she placed a second document next to it, the version submitted to my brokerage. 3 pages. No limitations addendum. No initials on a 4th page, because there was no 4th page. Derek stared at the 2 documents for a very long time. The notary arrived, which was when Natalie excused herself to use the restroom and did not come back for 11 minutes. When she came back, Derek had not signed anything. He was sitting with his arms crossed and a careful blankness on his face that I recognized from childhood. It was the look he got when he was calculating, not when he had given up. He was still looking for the exit. Claire told him there was no version of the attestation he could sign, that would not either contradict the document record or constitute an admission. She said this not unkindly. She said it the way you tell someone that the flight has been canceled. This is the fact. The flight is canceled. There is no point continuing to argue with the departure board. She also told him that the discrepancy between the two documents had already been reported to the Texas State Bar's Financial Fraud Division and flagged with the brokerage's compliance team. She told him that the new joint account had been identified and a hold request was pending. She told him that the investigation would proceed regardless of what happened in this room, but that what happened in this room would be part of the record. Derek looked at me. I gave you that money, I said. I did not raise my voice. I gave you $30,000 when your restaurant was failing, and you spent it on an apartment deposit without telling me. I initialed every page of that POA, and you removed one of them, and submitted a different version to my brokerage, and moved $287,500 into an account with your fiancé's name on it the week before my return. Flight. I know all of it. Claire knows all of it. The compliance team has the documents. This is not a conversation about whether it happened. This is a conversation about what comes next. He started to say something about how I had always had more than I needed, how the money just sat there, how the wedding costs were enormous and it was only going to be short-term, how he had planned to pay me back before I even noticed. I let him finish. You took $287,500, I said, from the account I have been building for 4 years to buy a house. Not because you needed it to survive, because you decided it was more convenient than asking me and risking a no, because you have spent your entire life learning that there is no cost to taking from me. I am telling you today that that lesson was wrong, and I am correcting it now. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I wanted a full return of the funds within 72 hours, a signed written acknowledgement of the unauthorized transfer, and a notarized statement from both him and Natalie confirming the scope of the original POA and the modification that occurred. In exchange, Claire would hold the fraud referral in abeyance while the civil process proceeded. He said he needed to talk to a lawyer. Claire told him that was his absolute right, and that she would give him 24 hours before she filed. He left with Natalie without saying goodbye to me. The door closed. I looked at Claire. She was already making notes. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid of the outcome. I had the documents. I had the records. Claire had built a case that had only one possible direction. I didn't sleep because of the $30,000. The conversation at Christmas, my mother calling on his behalf. 20 years of small moments I had reframed as normal, as the way families worked, as the price of being the dependable one. I lay in my bed and took them apart one at a time, like unpacking boxes after a move, and I set them on the floor of my mind and looked at them clearly for the first time, and I understood that the thing I was grieving was not the $287,500. It was the version of my family I had needed to believe in to keep showing up. 61 hours after that meeting, the funds were returned. All of it. Derek's attorney, a new one, hired in a hurry, sent a letter along with the transfer confirmation. The letter used words like good faith correction and administrative misunderstanding. Claire forwarded it to me with a single line. They blinked. The signed acknowledgement came 2 days later. The notarized statement came the day after that. Natalie's signature was smaller than usual. I don't know why I noticed that. The fraud referral went to the compliance division anyway. Claire had told me from the beginning that she had a reporting obligation regardless of the civil resolution, and I had told her to do her job. The investigation took 4 months. At the end of it, Derek's real estate license, he had gotten it 18 months earlier, as a new venture was suspended pending review. The brokerage closed his account access permanently. The joint account was flagged in the financial system in a way that will follow both their names for years. His lawyer sent another letter after that one, longer this time, about disproportionate response, and the impact on his livelihood, and the wedding that had to be postponed, and the stress on the family. I read it once. I filed it. I did not respond. My mother called me. She called me 17 times over the following 6 weeks. I answered twice. The first time, she asked me why I had done this to Derek. The second time, I told her I had not done anything to Derek. I had simply stopped absorbing the cost of what Derek did to me. There was a long silence on the phone. Then she said, "He's your brother, Maya." And I said, "I know." And I hung up. I want to tell you something about that call. I don't say it for sympathy. I say it because I think it's the part people don't talk about when they tell these stories. The money came back. The documents are on file. Derek will have consequences that follow him. By every measure, I won. And it still costs something. Holding the phone after it goes quiet, knowing that the woman on the other end chose her response the way she always does, which is to say she chose him first and asked me to understand. It still costs something to be right, when being right means losing the version of your family you wanted. But here is what I know now that I didn't know 2 years ago. I know that what I was calling love, that instinct to soften, to absorb, to sign the document quickly, So no one was uncomfortable. That was not love. That was conditioning. Love does not require you to make yourself smaller, so someone else can keep taking. Love does not come with a power of attorney attached to it. The house, by the way I bought it, it took me 14 more months to rebuild the savings buffer I wanted, and I was more careful this time about where I kept things and who had access to what. It has a yard, an afternoon light in the kitchen, and no one's name on the deed but mine. I don't hear from Derek. I don't hear from Natalie. My mother sends me texts on holidays that I read and sometimes respond to and sometimes don't, and I have made my peace with the ambiguity of that. I didn't do this to punish him. I want to be clear about that, the same way I want to be clear about all the other things I have said here. I did it because I finally understood that there is a version of forgiveness that is really just an invitation to be robbed again, and I was done extending that invitation. I did it because I looked at the document with my initials on a page that no longer existed, and I understood that some people will take everything you give them, and when that runs out, they will take the things you didn't give them, and when you object, they will be confused about why you are making this so difficult. I did it because I had spent 30 years being the one who made things easy, and I needed, just once, to make something very, very hard. If you believe that protecting yourself is not the same as being cruel, hit subscribe. And tell me, would you have waited as long as I did? Or would you have ended it sooner?